you can depend on for inspiration and motivation. SOAR High doesn't only give news. This is SOAR High TV Network, a place you can depend on for inspiration and motivation. SOAR High doesn't only give news, it inspires you to be the better version of yourself. Don't just fly, soar high.
Alone. Uncertainty. Doubt. Fear. In a strange place. Something stops you. Challenges test your strength. A rush of adrenaline. The light. The air. It is the moment. You elevated.
How they're going to control it.
So if you're coming from a country that hasn't got very many cases, then I don't think the quarantine measures are necessary, really.
I think it's a very good idea until we have some form of vaccine or some method for cure. We don't know who's had it and who hasn't got it.
Passengers arriving in the UK are down 99% on last year, and the aim of the restrictions is to limit the chance of a second wave of coronavirus.
Under the government's new rules, not only will those coming into the country have to self-isolate for 2 weeks, they also won't be allowed to take public transport or taxis from the airport. There'll be spot checks to make sure people are obeying the rules, and if they don't, they could get a £1,000 fine.
As the transmission rate across the United Kingdom falls and the number of travellers arriving in the UK begins to increase, imported cases could begin to pose a larger and increased threat.
But with so many planes grounded and fears for the industry, there's pressure to reopen.
As we see Europe opening up between European markets and some long-haul markets opening up as well, I think it will become increasingly difficult if we are seeing German citizens going on holiday to Greece, if people are locked at home, not able to have the same holiday themselves.
Lucy should have been spending September at this hotel in Greece. She was planning her dream wedding there. She wants to postpone it, but she's not sure the venue will let her, or if her guests will be able to travel.
When we booked it last year, my biggest worry was how we're going to fit everything in the suitcase. And now it's just like, is it even going to go ahead?
With foreign holidays likely to be cancelled this summer, people will almost certainly enjoy beauty spots a bit closer to home. Rebecca Williams, Sky News.
Now, a quick word about something coming up in a couple of weeks here on Sky News. From the 1st to the 4th of June, Dermot Murnaghan will be hosting After the Pandemic, Our New World, a series of special live programmes about what our world will be like once the pandemic is over. We'll be joined by some of the biggest names from the worlds of culture, politics, economics, science and technology, and you can take part. If you'd like to be in our virtual audience from your own home and put questions to the experts, go to skynews.com or the Sky News app and follow the instructions on how to apply.
Now, 5 people will appear in court later, charged with the murder of a law student in Blackburn. 19-year-old Aya Hatcham was shot as she walked to a supermarket near her home on Sunday. 2 other men in their 30s who were questioned have been released on bail pending further inquiries. The anti-malaria drug promoted by President Trump as a COVID-19 treatment has been linked to higher death rates amongst coronavirus patients. A study in the Lancet Medical Journal of nearly 100,000 patients found those treated with hydroxychloroquine had a higher risk of death and heart rhythm problems. Last week, Donald Trump said he'd been taking the drug as a preventative measure. Meanwhile, his presumptive opponent for the presidency is in some hot water as well.
You got more questions, but I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
Well, Joe Biden has since apologised for that comment, saying he shouldn't have been so cavalier.
Now, as Josephine Peters' coffin was being given a guard of honour by her NHS colleagues, her family in her native South Africa had to make do with watching her funeral on a live stream. Josephine had spent 18 years as an NHS nurse, but was planning a permanent return home to Johannesburg when she caught coronavirus while working on the front line at Southport Hospital in Merseyside. Our Africa correspondent John Sparks met Josephine's family, grieving from a distance in Johannesburg.
When Josephine Peter left her hometown in South Africa, it wasn't supposed to be forever. When she took a job as a nurse in a British hospital, she told her loved ones she was planning to return. But COVID-19 has taken Mrs. Peters' life and her dream, and it's left an African family broken-hearted.
Do you have moments where you regret the fact that your mother was a nurse in Britain?
No, because why would I regret? She was helping other people. They loved her. She was amazing.
What was she like? What kind of...
She was amazing. She loved me, and it was evident that she loved me so much.
Mrs. Peter worked and died at Southport Hospital in Merseyside, and she was honoured by her colleagues after her death. But her daughter, Bule, and her family in South Africa have not been able to participate or mark her passing.
Do you remember the last time you spoke to her on the phone?
2 days, I think, before her death.
Okay. Do you remember what you talked about?
It was a rough situation because that's when we found out she was in ICU.
Josephine came to Britain in 2002 and moved the family into a house next to Heathrow Airport. She would give 18 years to the NHS as a nurse and a midwife, but she made a big decision on her last trip home.
When was the last time she was here?
In January.
In January?
Yeah.
Okay.
We just come back from a family holiday, and I think she enjoyed herself so much because it was only like a month later. She sent like a mass text to our group chat. She was like, I'm coming home next year with your father, so be ready.
It was something she'd been thinking about for a while.
It's almost finished.
Almost.
Her children had moved back to South Africa, and her dream home was almost complete.
Yeah, some of the boxes that they sent through have arrived.
Right.
Like literally, you know.
So she was packing up?
Literally, she was, on the way home.
Josephine is also mourned by her friends in the UK, like fellow nurse and South African Cynthia Charles.
It takes really long to digest this whole thing.
Their profession is dangerous, she says, and the contribution of foreign-born health workers like Mrs. Peter is not always recognised.
She was a brave girl for the mere fact that she actually gave herself of herself. She could have said, no, I don't want to go into COVID wards, but we are just like that. We are very brave people, and she went very confidently so.
Josephine Peter built a house she'll never live in, but her memory lives on in the people she loved, and they'll keep her close in the country where she was born. John Sparks, Sky News, Johannesburg.
Okay, time to see what the weather's going to do for you this weekend. Joe Wheeler has got all the details. Do we need to get the sunscreen out, Joe?
Not just yet. You can probably put it away for today. Although we have got some fairly bright skies, it is going to be quite a bit cooler than it has been. Top temperature today probably only around 20 degrees Celsius, and that's down from 28.2 on Wednesday. That said, it's a fairly mild start to the day. Temperatures between 7 and 13 degrees Celsius. There is some brightness around it as well, but that may be short-lived. So really, we're looking at a day of two halves. For Scotland, Northern Ireland, it's going to be a wet day, as indeed it was pretty wet yesterday. But elsewhere, we're going to see sunny spells and scattered showers. Some of those showers a little on the sharp side. As I say, temperatures down, but then high pressure starts to build back in from the southwest. And with that, we'll see fewer showers, increased amounts of sunshine and temperatures starting to recover.
Joe, thank you. This is Sky News. Still to come for you today. You in need of some more lockdown exercise inspiration? Well, if you are, we've got just the man to start your fitness regime.
That's coming up next on Sky News. Well, now for the story behind the headline. I'm Dermot Murnahan and I'm the new host of the Sky News Daily Podcast, bringing you news and in-depth analysis from our team of specialists. I'll be joined by our experts to delve into the stories that matter to you. Trusted news with no agenda. The Sky News Daily Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts from.
Welcome back. Transport for London is reintroducing fares for bus services from today. Passengers haven't needed to tap their cards to pay for over a month as part of measures to boost safety. The government's asked TfL to resume charges as part of the £1.6 billion bailout agreed last week. Pubs will miss out on selling 10 million pints of beer over the bank holiday weekend due to lockdown. That's according to the British Beer and Pub Association, who says many pubs will need to stay closed beyond July, even if restrictions are lifted, as they will not be able to meet social distancing requirements. The founder of the Clap for Our Carers has suggested ending the celebration next Thursday. Anne-Marie Plas says it'll be the 10th time people have taken to the streets to applaud health workers fighting the COVID-19 outbreak. She thinks it'll be good to stop it at its peak before it becomes too political.
Now, folklore has suggested that storks fly in to deliver human babies. I don't know if that's true or not. Now, though, they're delivering chicks of their own. The first white chicks have hatched in the wild for the first time in the UK for hundreds of years. A conservation project in West Sussex has successfully bred 5 chicks with hopes there will be plenty more to come. Ali Fortescue reports.
In the midst of a strange time, something extraordinary.
It was a little bit of a nervous wait to see what happened.
No one has seen anything like this in the UK for a very long time. The first white storks born in the wild here that we know of since 1416.
We watched with bated breath last year for this pair. They had 3 eggs, but they didn't hatch, unfortunately. But they've managed to do it this year, which is fantastic.
At the Knepp estate, they monitor and track the birds, but beyond that, these storks have been left to live in the wild. And after years of waiting and hoping, hidden in the sky, 3 baby hatchlings.
So they're doing a little bit of a swap over. So that's the male and the female together. They're also trying to see off this other stork who's decided to come and say hello.
The land here was once intensely farmed, and now it's totally devoted to rewilding animals. The story of the stork chicks is a huge success here, but this is about bringing thousands of species back to a natural environment. What exactly is rewilding?
Rewilding it's very different to conventional conservation. What you're doing here is something that has no goals, no targets, other than just generally improving biodiversity, just generally getting ecosystems moving again and functioning. We just don't have any scrub like this left in Britain. We have zero tolerance to this sort of landscape, but it's one of the most biodiverse there is. But it's thanks to this kind of thorny scrub, the interaction with all the grazing animals that free roam throughout it, that we have habitat for things like nightingales and turtle doves, which are on the verge of extinction in Britain.
The bird that's a symbol of birth, born again in West Sussex wilderness. It's a historic moment here, and a timely reminder that sometimes things aren't lost forever. Ali Fortescue, Sky News.
Now, the lockdown may be forcing us to stay at home, but not everyone's just putting their feet up. Of course, lots of people doing exercise, even me doing sort of online classes and all that sort of thing. Now, over the past few weeks, of course, we brought you the stories of everyday heroes fighting coronavirus by doing their own physical challenges, raising money for the NHS. Let's have a look at the very latest one for you.
Okay, Grandad, when you're ready to go, yes. 83 slams, take it nice and easy, let's go.
Well, John O'Neill decided to mark his 83rd birthday by setting himself a hefty challenge. As you can see, slamming a 10-kilogram ball 83 times. Well, John's grandson is personal trainer to the stars, Bradley Simmons, and he joins us now. Bradley, good to see you this morning. I have to say, that's quite a task from your granddad. He must be fairly fit for his age.
He is very, very fit for his age. 83 years of age. He's up every morning at 6 o'clock, straight to his allotment. He loves the rowing machine, and he's active, honestly, every single day. So there was no surprise for me that my granddad could achieve that. And he's a massive inspiration for myself and everyone out there that watched that.
Yeah, well, it is inspirational, actually, to see everyone getting on with things. We've taken a bigger focus on exercise in lockdown, haven't we? Because I guess when some freedoms are taken away, you focus on things you can do. How popular have your exercise classes turned out to be?
Honestly, the engagement of my classes has been insane on Instagram Live. We've been averaging around 2,500 people working out alongside me every single day, which is incredible. We've managed to raise a lot of money for charity, and the numbers just keep going up. I've gained around 80,000 more followers, so that just goes to show the word of mouth. People wanting to work out from home, get themselves fit, keep their fitness levels up, or for some people to improve their health. Maybe this is a time for people to really focus on their fitness and improve their overall health. So it's been incredible, and I've enjoyed it. I'm tired, don't get me wrong. I've been training twice a day, filming my live Instagram workouts, but I've enjoyed it, and we've raised so much money for the NHS, so it's incredible.
Yeah, I was going to say, how many people do you think are, the fitness freaks just wanting to maintain those levels of fitness, and those people who are starting absolutely from scratch and just thinking, I just need to do something. I can't sit in the house all day.
Yeah, for some people might treat exercise as a boredom thing. They need to get out. Some people have got their own goals where they want to maintain their weight, their fitness levels. For me, I've seen a whole new mixture. I've done some beginner classes for my schedule. So on my schedule, I have Pilates, I have yoga, I have high intensity training, I have strength training, and I've got beginners classes. So something for everyone. But no, for sure, people get up nice and early, starting their day right. Luckily, we've got really nice sunshine, so we'll be training outside also. So it's great for people's mental health as well, not just their physical health, which is one of the main reasons I'm doing this also, to keep people sane.
Yeah, I was going to say mental health is really important in this. We've heard a lot about mental health. I mean, what is your take on how important mental health is? Because, I mean, you're a young man, and it's an issue that young men we know often don't talk about.
Yes, and I've had lots of friends who struggle to talk about it. For me, exercise is a great way to release that stress, to escape, to make yourself feel better. Obviously, they release those endorphins into the brain, but it is tough, and that's something I want to work with a charity called Calm once I've completed raising money for the NHS. But yeah, it is massive at the minute, especially when people are locked down. People might be struggling, people might be lonely, people might be stressed about losing their job or what's ahead. So exercise has a big part to play for people's overall health, mental and physical. So I do advise people out there, if they are struggling, try to do one of my classes, see how it makes you feel, and I'd love to hear your feedback.
What about those people, and it is important, I think, always, whether it's watching one of your classes on Instagram or whether it's people doing Zoom lessons. There are lots of people, myself included, who felt really nervous about joining something that they've not done before and looking stupid and not being able to do it. What's your message to them?
Just take it easy. I think it's great what you're doing. You don't have to be great to start, but you have to start to be great. That's one of my favorite sayings. And just take it easy, ease your way into it. Don't have to compare yourself with anyone else, which is really important. And yeah, just encourage yourself every single day, be positive, have a positive mindset, eat healthy nutrition, because that plays a massive part. Make sure you're getting a lot of rest and sleep. And yeah, just keep going with exercise. If you're not great now, 2-3 weeks time with good routine and determination and commitment, you're going to see really, really, really good results, which is going to give you that buzz and that good routine, which is going to obviously going to improve your overall health. So yeah, for me, just get into it. Don't worry about not being great to begin with, but once you get into a good routine, things will change around for sure.
Bradley, really, really good to talk to you this morning. Give our love to Grandad.
Yes, I will do. He's resting today. Or actually, I'm not sure. He's probably in the allotment today.
Cheers, Bradley.
Cheers. Take care.
This is Sky News. Coming up, an offence worth resigning over. Liberal Democrat leader Ed Davey says yes. Talking more about Dominic Cummings' lockdown transgressions next. Good morning, it's 7:32. You're watching Sky News at breakfast. Opposition parties are calling for answers following claims Boris Johnson's top aide broke the government's lockdown rules. The Mirror and Guardian newspapers say Dominic Cummings travelled to Durham from London with his family in March as he recovered from coronavirus symptoms. Well, let's speak to the acting Liberal Democrat leader, Sir Ed Davey. Good morning to you. What exactly do you understand to have happened?
Well, it appears from the Guardian and the Mirror that Dominic Cummings, the Prime Minister's closest advisor, travelled over 200 miles to ask his elderly grandparents to look after his children when he and his wife had got coronavirus. That looks like it's in real breach of the rules. And when millions of people have sacrificed so much in order to stop the spread of coronavirus, people have not seen their loved ones, had to cancel weddings, not been able to go to the funerals of their closest relatives. It looks quite outrageous that the Prime Minister's closest advisor has done this. And frankly, if that turns out to be the case, he must go. He should either resign or the Prime Minister should sack him.
Is there any explanation that you would accept?
Well, the Prime Minister has got to obviously look at this urgently and got to make his position clear, because the buck stops with the Prime Minister on this appointment. I can't see, in my reading of the guidelines, that this is anything other than a very severe breach of those guidelines. I'm always someone who would like to hear an explanation, but I can't see how Dominic Cummings can wriggle out of this one. And I think he ought to do the decent thing today and to resign.
Could it be that it comes under exceptional circumstances, though? Because we read that he needed to take his child to his parents because he was too ill, and his wife also, to look after their young child.
I don't think that's the case. Certainly not according to the guidelines that were in existence when he made this very long journey. And I think people are also asking questions about why he would go to his own parents, who were clearly in a vulnerable category. I can't see any way that this could be under some exemption. Many people have had to deal with their children and when they've been in self-isolation, when they've been abiding by the rules. I don't think there can be one rule for everyone else and a different rule from the Prime Minister's top team.
Can we look, though, for a moment at the human circumstance of this? I mean, what would you have done if you'd had a young child that obviously needed to be looked after and both yourself and your wife weren't able to do that? What should he have done?
Well, we all have sympathy with people who have these difficult circumstances. The question is, what were the rules and what was open to him? I don't think going right across the country to elderly relatives was the solution. It certainly wasn't in the rules, as far as I read them. So, of course, one has sympathy with people with these difficult dilemmas, but these were the sorts of things that people were facing in their millions. And I just don't think there should be an exception made for the Prime Minister's top advisor.
But specifically, what would you have suggested as a solution?
Well, I actually think he could have stayed at home with his wife and with his child. I'm pretty sure that would have been possible. And if not, maybe he should have contacted the NHS or the local authority. There are people out there who are willing to help in the community, who are trained, who are less vulnerable. In my own constituency, we've seen the council and the NHS and the voluntary services providing amazing support for those who've been self-isolating, who've been in need. And I don't see why Dominic Cummings couldn't have contacted local experts, local people who could have helped.
On a wider question, do you think the government now has the virus under control with the institution of the quarantine, with the testing, tracking and tracing? Is it under control?
Well, I hope it is. This is such a tragedy for so many people. But I fear, first of all, that we still have the crisis in our care homes. I don't believe the evidence suggests that yet is sorted. And I'm very worried about their strategy on testing, tracing and isolation. This is essential so the lockdown can be lifted, so we can get back to something near normality. But it doesn't appear yet they have got that under control. They haven't got a proper testing, tracing and isolation strategy. They haven't geared up anywhere near enough. And without that, it's going to prove very difficult to get back to normal life. And I really urge the government, they should have been doing this weeks ago, months ago. They've been very slow throughout this crisis. They've really got to get to grips with this so we can get the schools to return, get everybody back to work. But it's in the government's court to take these final actions, which it's been so slow in doing.
Yeah, we are hearing from Professor Carl Hernigan, Director of the Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine at Oxford University. He's saying that the coronavirus is disappearing at a rate that's speeding up.
Well, I very much hope he's right. And I will listen to professors like him, scientists, and I hope we can lift the lockdown. But as the Prime Minister keeps reminding us, it's the famous R number. And while that's still very prevalent in some parts of the country, because it's not the same across the country, in the care homes, we've got to be very cautious. I think given a huge number of people who've lost their lives during this crisis, far higher than in similar countries, I think it's right to be cautious. And to listen to the scientists, absolutely, but to take a cautious approach. And I really worry that there are voices in the government who are so desperate to lift the lockdown that they're not quite listening to the advice and the evidence.
So, Davey, thank you very much for speaking to us this morning.
Now, as Ramadan comes to an end, Britain's 2.6 million Muslims are preparing to celebrate one of their biggest holidays, Eid, under the shadow of a global pandemic. Now, with mosques closed and social distancing rules still in place, of course, those celebrating are resigned to the fact that festivities are going to look pretty different this year. Noel Phillips reports now on how Eid is being marked in isolation.
Breaking the silence of the lockdown to mark the end of Ramadan. For the first time, the Muslim call to prayer is delivered at the Masjid Aisha Mosque in North London. This traditional call usually takes place inside, but due to strict social distancing measures, many of the rituals and traditions practiced during this holy month have been upended.
I'm in prison for a crime I didn't do. That's how it feels like. I'm locked up. So it's very challenging for us at the moment. We've heard of epidemics in different parts of the world, but a pandemic on such a scale, I don't think anyone was expecting this. And the mosque is the focal point during this period. But now that the mosque is closed and we're maintaining the social distancing rules, it has been challenging for the people. And the people want to come to the mosque, but they can't.
Prayers and sermons have now been moved online. In normal times, people would gather in packed mosques on the first day of Eid. But for the 2.6 million Muslims in Britain, this will be an occasion like no other. COVID-19 has had a devastating impact in the Islamic community. 58-year-old father of three, Aifatullah, is one of 6 people to die from the Masjid Aisha Mosque.
I would have held his hand, said a prayer over him, and leave it at that. But we weren't able to do that. And sorry. I don't know. And it's something that I'll never get that moment back.
This is your first Ramadan where you've broken your fast without your dad being there.
One thing that we do on Eid day is that we give a hug after the prayer, and I'd always look forward to coming out and giving my dad one of those hugs.
As we enter the final days of Ramadan,
famous faces from the British Asian community urging Muslims to celebrate Eid with their families at home.
I think we've got to remain optimistic. There's hope, and I think things will get better.
The pandemic may have disrupted the community aspect of these holy festivities, but that hasn't stopped Muslims focusing on the positives despite the challenges. Noel Phillips, Sky News in North London.
Well, it's time now to have a look at the weather for you, see what's happening this weekend. Joe's in Lincolnshire for us this morning.
I am indeed, and it's a lovely bright start to the day, but a slightly different look to the way it has been. High pressure has been in charge until yesterday, and then we saw this change to fairly windy weather. And the wind is going to stay with us through today. It's a fresher feel to the day. We'll see temperatures at best up to around 20 degrees Celsius, that's 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Still further wet weather to come for Scotland as well through the course of the day. So temperatures generally in the mid-teens, a little bit higher perhaps down in the far southeast. Those showers quite sharp where you do catch one. The weather will start to clear from the west later, so dry for most overnight, apart from Scotland, northern England, parts of Northern Ireland. That rain fizzling out earlier on Sunday and generally improving as we end the weekend.
Thank you very much. After the break, we're going to be taking a look at the newspapers with Dawn Neeson, former editor of the Daily Star, and Becca Hudson, senior editor at the Daily Express. There they are, primed, ready to go. Do stay with us.
Having a party.
I'm having a party, a girls' party. Yay, where are your drinks, girls?
It is nothing short but an amazing day today.
I wake up, sleep, eat, wake up, sleep, eat.
My name's Tony Nicholson. I'm a fitness coach and I'm an actor.
Want some coffee? No. You want some coffee? No.
Did you know symptoms of hay fever can develop at any stage of life, not just in childhood? The Pollen Reports, sponsored by Philips Connected Air Purifiers.
The weather remains a little unsettled through the course of the day, but high pressure is likely to build back in over the next few days, and that's going to lessen the winds, decrease the showers, increase the sunshine and increase the temperatures too. And of course, with grass pollen season approaching, that will increase the pollen count as well. But certainly for today, with rain in the north and showers elsewhere, not to mention a fairly brisk wind and lower temperatures with a max of 20 Celsius, the count is likely to be low across the country.
The Pollen Reports, sponsored by Philips Connected Air Purifiers.
With us this morning to take us through the newspapers are Dawn Neeson, former editor of the Daily Star, and Becca Hudson, senior editor at the Daily Express. Welcome to you both. Good morning, ladies. Let's start off with the front page of The Guardian and the story everyone's talking about this morning. Dominic Cummings and his trip to Durham. Becca.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the news that Boris Johnson's most senior advisor, Dominic Cummings, drove 264 miles to Durham when he had coronavirus symptoms to visit his elderly parents, saying that he was too unwell to look after his child. This is just days after Boris Johnson announced the lockdown, a policy that Dominic Cummings, ironically, was very heavily involved in. You know, and obviously this morning there's just outrage everywhere about the gross hypocrisy that we're seeing at the very top of government, and calls, as we saw just before the break with Ed Davey on your programme, for him to resign. You know, we saw Dr. Neil Ferguson, who crept across London to see his special friend, had to resign for breaking the rules of lockdown. And in Scotland, the Chief Medical Officer, Catherine Calderwood, who visited her second home, also had to resign. So lots of pressure on Boris Johnson this morning, I think, to be decisive and to force Dominic Cummings out. You know, this completely undermines the government message about the lockdown and is a gift to his political enemies. You know, we haven't heard from Keir Starmer yet this morning, but you can imagine this is a real gift for him, a man who's pretty forensic in his scrutiny of Boris as it is. You know, and the really serious implication here is that it might just mean that people start thinking that if it's good enough for Dominic Cummings, it's good enough for them, and we start seeing people at this critical time, you know, really flouting the rules of lockdown. So truly appalling behaviour from Dominic Cummings there, and it'll be interesting to see how Number 10 respond.
Dawn, you're nodding your head there. Do you think he should go?
Yes, Gillian, I think he should. I think it's inexcusable what he did. I mean, you know, if you are suffering any symptoms, you stay at home, and to drive all that way to your elderly parents who are in their 70s in a high-risk group, it's just, it does, honestly, you can't believe anyone would be that stupid to do it. Will he go, though? No, I don't think he will. I mean, this man's Teflon, isn't he? He can do anything, and Dominic will still be there by Boris's side.
Becca nodding her head there to that one. She doesn't seem to think he will go either. Dawn, take us into The Telegraph, the story to do with obesity.
Yes, this is, again, it's coronavirus, but you can't get away from it. And we are, as we've known for a while, the fattest nation in Europe now, with 2/3 of Brits in this country being overweight or obese. And we now know almost for sure that it is one of the main factors in suffering very badly from coronavirus. This is a study of almost 500,000 Brits found that being obese doubles the risk of needing hospital treatment for coronavirus. 28,000 hospital cases show just how deadly the consequences have been. And it's very interesting because we're comparing ourselves with Germany on this. We went into lockdown at exactly the same time. Their death toll has been a lot less than ours. And now scientists are sort of veering towards the fact that because we have such a high obesity problem in this country, that maybe that is why we have a higher death toll. I mean, obviously, there are lots and lots of facts involved in this, not least people like Dominic Cummings. But it is very interesting that the obesity in this country could be the reason that more people are dying of coronavirus. And more men are obese than women. And we also know that men are affected more by coronavirus as well. So it is time we really did tackle this. I mean, we are the fattest in Europe, and it is just, it's a killer in every sense, but with coronavirus on board, it's just, it's really frightening thing.
Becca, do you have a phobia?
Currently, my roots are what I'm most afraid of. So this is the Mail have got this mega survey this morning about the state of the nation and our attitudes during the coronavirus pandemic. And there's some really interesting little glimpses into how people are finding it. So unsurprisingly, nearly 100% of people think that our frontline and key workers have behaved brilliantly and have gone above and beyond the call of duty to keep us all safe. And 66% of people acknowledging that there's been a crisis and a mishandling in our care homes. And then what I thought was interesting, that despite 40% of people surveyed agreeing that this is having a mega impact on the economy and forecasting it will take over 3 years for us to recover, still 53% of people want us to remain in lockdown. They think it's being lifted too quickly. And 43% of people said that they've enjoyed it, saying that their marriages have improved, their relationship with their kids have improved, and they've got a little bit more cash generally as well. So people have rather enjoyed the time, this time together. And then just a really fab little detail. When asked what people are most looking forward to doing when lockdown is lifted, after, of course, seeing your friends and family, we are most excited about going to the hairdressers, which is something I can completely agree with.
I thought it was going to be the pub. Interesting.
The pub is third.
Oh, it's third. OK, all right. Dawn, talk to us about safe corridors. This is a story in the Mirror, whether we will potentially be able to travel.
Yeah, this is a story that has been talked about all week, Gillian, but Priti Patel hasn't yet discounted the idea that we will have an agreement with countries like France, Spain and Greece that we can travel to, reciprocal. We can travel to and from on a safe air corridor, which means there is sort of an agreement that it's sort of like coronavirus infections are, free, so you're tested, but then you can still fly backwards and forth without the isolating at either side of it. Now, I'm not quite sure how this is working because obviously Priti seemed quite determined that this 14-day isolation period was going to come in if you travel to this country. So how we can then say, well, if you're coming from France on holiday, maybe you don't need to do that. It's still very confusing. And Priti was saying that it's not going to happen immediately, but I think she was giving people a little bit of hope that maybe later on this year, maybe September, there will be an opportunity for people to go on holiday, which obviously I think people will be needing then. And, hopefully that will be the case. But I think there's lots of details to be ironed out in this one.
Yes, hopefully it gives people a little bit of hope for the future.
Yeah.
Becca, these fashion face masks, people aren't content with just wearing your bog standard white or blue mask.
Absolutely. So we had it handbags and it shoes, and now you've got it face masks. So various fashion houses across the world and in the UK are coming up with these kind of gorgeous couture-like face masks because it looks like we're going to be wearing them for a long time. So if you want to make a statement, you can get some gorgeous silk ones or designer logos. You can see them, they're absolutely lovely, some of them. I initially did pull a face about all this because I thought it was maybe taking it all a little too far. But considering they're going to be a huge part of our wardrobes for the foreseeable, why not, get a nice pretty one? And actually kind of the fashion industry have sort of played their part in the coronavirus pandemic. We've seen that the luxury fashion house LVMH have been involved in making PPE and hand gel. In the UK, Burberry made protective gowns for hospital staff. So it's a little bit of fashion with a conscience. And as you can tell, I love an accessory, so I shall certainly be buying a suitable top face mask.
I was rather hoping you were going to whip out your very fashionable mask, but you haven't got it to hand.
Next time.
I can bet it's very fashionable. We've just got time for this last story, Dawn. In The Sun, Meghan is back in the news.
Yeah, Meghan, she's never far from the news. But this is, I'm sure, a story she might actually quite like, although who knows, given her sense of humour these days. Basically, a survey has been done about the top 10 sexiest TV shows, and Meghan's sitcom or drama, what she calls it, was number 5. So Suits, where she played a raunchy lawyer, quite a few sex scenes in that, came in at number 5. She's beaten by Shameless, Game of Thrones, Normal People, and Suits, as I said, is in at number 5. So yeah, Meghan's getting people all hot and sweaty.
Yes. I did actually, I must admit, go back and look at Suits in retrospect after I knew who Meghan was. And it is quite racy, isn't it, Becca? Have you seen it?
Oh, gosh. Yeah. Super sexy stuff.
You do wonder what the rest of the royals think of those scenes when they're replayed.
Yeah.
I actually think that's probably the least of their worries with Meghan, to be honest with you.
Sorry, say that again, Dawn.
I actually think that's the least of their worries with Meghan at the moment, to be honest with you.
Yeah, you might have a point there. Thank you both for taking us through the papers. See you a little later on. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Much more coming up. Stay with us at the top of the hour for all the very latest on the government's fight against coronavirus. Do stay with us.
Good morning, it's 8 o'clock. This is Sky News top stories for you this morning. Comings and goings, calls for the Prime Minister's top aide to resign for breaking lockdown rules.
I can't see how Dominic Cummings can wriggle out of this one, and I think he ought to do the decent thing today and to resign.
In the air, uncertainty for foreign holidays as people entering the UK are told they'll need to self-isolate for a fortnight.
If you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
Joe Biden apologises for saying African Americans considering voting for Donald Trump aren't black.
We catch up with the student nurse who began her on-the-ward training in the middle of the pandemic.
And we'll take you through the papers at 2:15 with Dawn Neeson, former editor of the Daily Star, and Becca Hudson, senior editor at The Express. Well, thanks for joining us this morning. Our main news for you today, and Labour is demanding a swift explanation from Downing Street after reports that Boris Johnson's top aide, Dominic Cummings, travelled hundreds of miles to visit his parents days after the Prime Minister put the country into lockdown in March. Ignoring the instruction to stay home, The Mirror and The Guardian are both reporting that Mr Cummings travelled from London to Durham with his family so that his parents could provide childcare while he and his wife recovered from coronavirus symptoms. The acting Lib Dem leader has called for him to quit over those allegations. Our deputy political editor, Sam Coates, reports.
When the most powerful backroom man in Westminster is in a hurry, people want to know why. Here, Dominic Cummings scurrying out of Downing Street 4 days after Boris Johnson told the nation to stay at home to save lives. Where he went next and why could have big implications for the government.
You should not be meeting friends. If your friends ask you to meet, you should say no. You should not be meeting family members who do not live in your home.
Mr Cummings was seen rushing from Downing Street on March the 27th after it was announced that Boris Johnson and Matt Hancock had tested positive for coronavirus. Downing Street said he developed symptoms over the weekend of the 28th and 29th of March. On Tuesday, March the 31st, Durham police received a report that an individual had travelled from London to Durham and officers made contact with him. The Guardian is also reporting that a witness saw Mr Cummings at the grounds of his parents' home near Durham with a young child on April the 5th, less than 7 days after displaying symptoms. He was photographed in Downing Street just over a week later. Durham police said later they had contacted his family to remind them of the rules on self-isolation and unnecessary travel, stopping short of quite saying the PM's chief advisor had broken them. But Labour want answers. The British people do not expect there to be one rule for them and another rule for Dominic Cummings. Number 10 need to provide a very swift explanation for his actions. It's hard to overstate just how central Dominic Cummings is to Boris Johnson's government, and has been from the moment both men walked into Number 10 last summer. Whether you're an ally or a foe or even just a Whitehall bystander, all say that Cummings is absolutely central to operations where he directs, he interferes, even on occasion intimidates. So don't expect decisions to be taken lightly, even though the involvement of the police means this is a serious charge.
Morning, Mr Cummings.
Opposition suggesting a resignation may be in order.
I can't see, in my reading of the guidelines, that this is anything other than a very severe breach of those guidelines. I'm always someone who would like to hear an explanation, but I can't see how Dominic Cummings can wriggle out of this one. And I think he ought to do the decent thing today and to resign.
At a time when millions of people are really making significant sacrifices in order to stick to the rules. It seems that Dominic Cummings has gone halfway across England. An awful lot of people will be incredibly shocked that he did this, and Boris Johnson needs to sack him.
Downing Street has not officially responded to the story, but they seem set to argue Dominic Cummings and his wife were so ill they needed their child to be cared for by grandparents. Number 10 appear to want to tough it out. Sam Coate, Sky News.
Let's talk to our political correspondent Rob Powell, who's in Westminster for us this morning. I mean, this is some very real pressure on Number 10, isn't it?
Yeah, but as yet, 12 hours or so since this story first broke, still nothing on the record officially from Number 10. But what we have had overnight is a series of anonymous briefings coming from allies and people close to Dominic Cummings, essentially saying that Mr. Cummings and his wife were so ill with coronavirus symptoms, they were unable to look after their young child. And that's why they went to his parents' house in Durham, that Mr. Cummings and his wife stayed in a separate building to his parents. And these allies of Dominic Cummings are also pointing to a quote from the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, which says that if you are too ill to look after children, then in exceptional circumstances, you can go for a number of care options, one of which is potentially relying on family support. But whilst that's one statement from the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, if you go back through press conferences, written advice, you can find any number of pieces of guidance that explicitly say if you've got symptoms of coronavirus, you should not leave your house, let alone travel 260 miles from an urban area to a rural area, that you shouldn't put young children with elderly grandparents because they may be carrying the virus, but in a mild form, but the elderly people may be exposed to a more complicated, complex version of it. So huge pressure on Number 10. For now, they look to be falling in behind Dominic Cummings, but I think the risk is that people look at this and say, well, if there's been exceptions made for the Prime Minister's right-hand man, why can't there be exceptions made for me as well?
OK, Rob, for now, thank you.
People are being urged to stay away from beaches this bank holiday weekend as England is set to bask in dry, sunny weather, even though an easing of lockdown restrictions does permit travel to the coast. There's also uncertainty for sun seekers hoping to head to foreign climes this summer, with the confirmation that anyone entering the UK will have to self-isolate or face a £1,000 fine. Rebecca Williams reports on the uncertainty thrown up by the new travel restrictions.
The desolate arrivals hall at Heathrow Terminal 5, usually packed with tourists at this time of year off on holiday. Now just a few cautious travellers in face masks. They've arrived on this busy flight from Gibraltar, where there are mixed views about the self-isolation measures that are going to be introduced by the government.
It all seems a little bit too late, and to start it in 2 weeks' time seems ridiculous.
I think it's a good idea personally, but I don't know how they're going to control it.
So if you're coming from a country that hasn't got very many cases, then I don't think the quarantine measures are necessary, really.
I think it's a very good idea. Until we have some form of vaccine or some method for cure, we don't know who's had it and who hasn't got it.
From the airport.
Passengers arriving in the UK are down 99% on last year, and the aim of the restrictions is to limit the chance of a second wave of coronavirus.
Under the government's new rules, not only will those coming into the country have to self-isolate for 2 weeks, they also won't be allowed to take public transport or taxis from the airport. There'll be spot checks to make sure people are obeying the rules, and if they don't, they could get a £1,000 fine.
As the transmission rate across the United Kingdom falls and the number of travellers arriving in the UK begins to increase, imported cases could begin to pose a larger and increased threat.
But with so many planes grounded and fears for the industry, there's pressure to reopen.
As we see Europe opening up between European markets and some long-haul markets opening up as well, I think it will become increasingly difficult if we are seeing German citizens going on holiday to Greece, if people are locked at home, not able to have the same holiday themselves.
Lucy should have been spending September at this hotel in Greece. She was planning her dream wedding there. She wants to postpone it, but she's not sure the venue will let her, or if her guests will be able to travel.
When we booked it last year, my biggest worry was how we're going to fit everything in the suitcase. And now it's just like, is it even going to go ahead?
With foreign holidays likely to be cancelled this summer, people will almost certainly enjoy beauty spots a bit closer to home. Rebecca Williams, Sky News.
A quick word now about something coming up in a couple of weeks here on Sky News. From the 1st to the 4th of June, Dermot Murnahan will be hosting After the Pandemic, Our New World, a series of special live programmes about what our world will be like once the pandemic is over. We'll be joined by some of the biggest names from the worlds of culture, politics, economics, science and technology. And you can take part too. If you'd like to be in our virtual audience from your own home and put questions to the experts, go to skynews.com or the Sky News app and follow the instructions on how to apply. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has joined the UK in condemning the new security law China has announced it plans to impose on Hong Kong. The law would ban treason, succession, sedition and subversion in Hong Kong. And Mr Pompeo says it would be a death knell for the high degree of autonomy Beijing had promised the territory. Well, NBC reporter Tessa Arcelia joins us now from Hong Kong. Good morning to you. When we spoke a little while back, we mentioned the tensions being heightened by the proposal of these new laws. What is the situation like now on the streets?
Well, Gillian, as the day progresses, we see a lot more chatter on social media, especially surrounding the calls for protest tomorrow, Sunday, despite social distancing restrictions still in place. And in the last hour or so, we also saw some photos and reports coming out of Taiwan where people are protesting in solidarity with Hong Kong. Obviously, what happens in Hong Kong, they will see it as a signal as what could happen to them as well. And here locally, there have been reports of increased activity around the Chinese liaison office, which is heavily guarded on normal days. And now there are some armored police vans coming in and out. So this could signal more activity leading up to calls for protest tomorrow. Now, generally, the sense here in Hong Kong, the opinion from the opposition especially, is that this could be the end, real end to the one country, two systems, which gives them rights and freedoms not available on the mainland. And the one legislator I spoke to, fighting back tears, told me this is the end of her hometown, the end of Hong Kong. Now, it must be said, the chief executive did come out in support of the law and said, look, Hong Kong will still be free, but we need this law to ensure stability in the region. And there are growing voices that these continued protests is really damaging economically and destabilizing for the city. Now, the UK, Australia and Canada have issued a joint statement expressing their deep concern, but all eyes are really on the United States. You mentioned Mike Pompeo's statements there, because the United States will have to assess whether Hong Kong remains sufficiently autonomous from China in order to extend the city's preferential economic treatment. So economically, Hong Kong is distinct from China. Let's not forget, the Hong Kong dollar is still pegged to the US dollar. So that is a worry here as well as financial center. And obviously, we'll be keeping an eye out for what happens tomorrow. Interesting on what law enforcement decisions will be made in light of COVID social distancing restrictions. Gillian?
Tessa, thank you.
5 people will appear in court later, charged with the murder of a law student in Blackburn. 19-year-old Aya Hatcham was shot as she walked to a supermarket near her home on Sunday. 2 other men in their 30s who were questioned have been released on bail pending further inquiries. The anti-malaria drug promoted by President Trump as a COVID-19 treatment has been linked to higher death rates amongst coronavirus patients. A study in the Lancet Medical Journal of nearly 100,000 patients found those treated with hydroxychloroquine had a higher risk of death and heart rhythm problems. Last week, President Trump said he'd been taking the drug as a preventative measure. Meanwhile, his presumptive opponent for the presidency is in hot water too.
You got more questions, but I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, and you ain't black.
Well, Joe Biden since apologised for that comment, saying he shouldn't have been so cavalier. Well, just in case you had forgotten, we are 2 months into lockdown and the scrutiny of the government's handling of the crisis so far has increased in recent weeks. Delta Poll has released new data exclusively to Sky News detailing how the public feels about the government's performance to date. Let's have a look at some of those figures then. It's found 36% of people say they don't think Boris Johnson is handling his job particularly well. However, 44% of people say they would vote Conservative if there was an immediate election, but that's a 19-point drop since this time last month. Well, let's talk to Joe Twyman from Delta Poll. Good to see you this morning, Joe. What are we to make of these findings?
Well, what's clear is that since the strict lockdown rules were relaxed, we've really entered a second phase in terms of public opinion. And what we call rallying around the flag that we saw during the height of the pandemic, where support for the Conservatives and for Boris Johnson really spiked up, that has fallen back. And we appear, at least so far, to be moving to what could be best described as business as usual in terms of the polling. But having said that, the Conservatives are still doing well. They're still ahead. Boris Johnson is just ahead of Keir Starmer in terms of personal ratings. And when you ask people the simple question, are the government doing the right thing or the wrong thing when it comes to the COVID-19 outbreak, you see that a majority of people still consistently believe they're doing the right thing.
Is that to be expected in some senses? As you say, the sort of rallying around the flag idea at a time of crisis, people do tend to unite quite a lot, don't they?
Yes, that's right, and we see that in lots of cases. Whether it's periods of great sadness, for instance, the death of the Queen Mother and Princess Diana, or whether it's at times of crisis such as the Iraq War, we see that support for the incumbents, for the government, and for the Prime Minister does tend to go up. But we also know that that situation rarely lasts, and so I would have been amazed if the kind of historically high levels of support that the Conservatives and Boris Johnson had been able to achieve even a couple of weeks ago had been able to be maintained. And so they've been doing well, but they were never going to do that well consistently. The question now is, over the next few weeks and the next few months, will they be able to sustain the level of support that they have at the moment, or will the increased complexity around the rules, will specific events around the rules mean that people are less supportive of their position going forward?
What else have you asked in this poll? Because obviously there's some key questions that need answering over the coming weeks.
Well, we've asked a whole host of different questions, and one of the questions we have asked is about whether people think it's more important that we maintain people's lives as a result of COVID-19, or whether we should worry more about people losing their lives as a result of the contraction of the economy. We've asked that about the next 12 months and the next 5 years, and regardless of which way you ask it, people's top priority is people losing their lives to COVID now rather than the economic implications in the future. And of course, that makes things difficult for the government when they plan to reopen the economy and re-energize it. We've also asked about schools reopening, which of course has been a hugely controversial topic over the last few days. And we found that a majority of people believe that next academic year, September 2020, is the right time for school children to go back. Now, that figure is slightly lower among people who actually have children at school, but it's still by far the most popular option. Fewer than 1 in 5 people believes that they should go back before the new academic year.
Yeah, it's interesting when you get all those perspectives that actually seem to be, going against what is being proposed at the moment. I mean, with these sort of figures, is it likely that actually the policies could be adjusted, or do you get the impression that actually the government is laid out where it wants to head and is going to stick with that plan of action?
I think it's possible that things could change based on public opinion, but I think a much stronger determinant is the situation on the ground. And so what we see with the number of positive cases, what we see with the number of deaths, that will be the biggest determinant of government policy. If we see things moving back to where we were a couple of weeks ago, if we see the graphs start to move up again, the all-important R figure, this figure for the number of people who are catching the disease, if that rises, then that's likely to have a far greater impact on the policies, whether it's schools, whether it's movements, whether it's holidays, whether it's isolation. That will have a far greater impact than public opinion. But I'm sure that the government is looking at public opinion day in, day out, and taking it into account, at least to some degree.
Okay, Joe, good to talk to you. Thank you. Well, of course, one of the benefits that we've had over the last few months in terms of lockdown is that the weather has generally been pretty nice, and it does make it all a little bit more bearable. Is that going to continue this weekend, Joe?
Well, it's not so much that it continues, because we saw quite a big change in the weather yesterday as this area of low pressure started crossing the north of the country, bringing rain to Scotland, Northern Ireland and showers elsewhere. And we get to see more of the same today in terms of blustery showers, many of those in the west at the moment, but they will become more widespread as time goes on. And we've also got another wet day to come over Scotland. So through the course of the day then, we're starting with temperatures between 7 and 13 degrees Celsius. They will only rise to the mid to late teens for some. Top temperatures around 20 degrees Celsius in London. As I say, blustery showers across England and Wales, wet weather across Scotland. Things do start to dry up, improve from the west tonight, and certainly by the time we get to Monday, it should be quite warm again.
Lovely. Thanks, Joe.
The British Red Cross sets up a hotline for people needing practical support in lockdown. After the break, we'll be joined by senior psychosocial practitioner with the Red Cross, Stephen Regal.
That's coming up next on Sky News. Well, now for the story behind the headline. I'm Dermot Murnahan, and I'm the new host of the Sky News Daily Podcast, bringing you news and in-depth analysis from our team of specialists. I'll be joined by our experts to delve into the stories that matter to you. Trusted news with no agenda. The Sky News Daily Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts from.
The British Red Cross have set up a free hotline for those at home and struggling to access food and medication during lockdown. So far, they say the majority of calls have been from people struggling to access food. As well as practical advice, they hope to offer pastoral care for those who are lonely or worried. We're joined now by senior psychosocial practitioner with the British Red Cross, Stephen Regal. Good morning to you. We tend traditionally to think of the Red Cross in terms of, international aid, famines or places of war, war-torn countries. But I suppose COVID is on that scale, if not actually a greater disaster.
Yes, and I think also that people are probably aren't aware that the British Red Cross have a significant presence in this country and often do a lot in the community and beyond. For example, responding to major crises and major disasters in this country as well. But we've been particularly active in terms of the COVID response with the helpline, which I can give the number out before we finish. And it's on the front of the web page. And as you say, the calls have been to do with practical requests at the moment, but we are getting an increasing number of calls where the content is more for emotional support, people wanting to talk, people might be elderly. And I think that we're in a time now as the lockdown starts to ease, that I'm sure that this is raising anxiety in many people because the uncertainty is still there.
Give us a flavour of the types of calls that you're getting, what people are particularly keen to talk about.
I think people are often keen to talk about their own kind of emotional response to their own anxieties, their own fears. There haven't been any significant, or not that we can gauge, any serious calls, but in terms of people's mental health, but in terms of wanting somebody to listen. They may have a query, and sometimes the request might come in for a practical request, but then it will turn into talking. And the people who are on the helpline are trained, very professional, and it's a free helpline. I must emphasise that. Who have lots of experience in dealing with crisis and with people in distress. So they're good at listening, and they're good at perhaps linking people into local support where need be.
Yes, we spoke about people struggling to access food. So what was the particular help that you offer in those scenarios?
Well, people can make deliveries, people can collect medication, and also link into local support, because they may be requesting services that may be local to that particular person, in terms of it could be something like a food bank, it could be in terms of linking up with a relative that they may not be able to get in touch with, or a friend.
And tell us how people can access the service. You mentioned that number at the start.
The number's on the website. So if you go to britishredcross.org.uk, it's on the front page, and the support line, the number is 0808 196 3651. So 0808 196 3651.
Thank you so much for speaking to us, Stephen Regal. I'll just read that number out again. So it's 0808 196 3651 for those wanting to access that free helpline from the Red Cross.
Well, stay with us here on Sky News at Breakfast. Coming up, we're going to catch up with a student nurse who started her training in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic. Good morning to you. It's 8:31. This is Sky News at breakfast. Top stories today.
Opposition parties are calling for answers following claims Boris Johnson's top aide broke the government's lockdown rules. The Mirror and Guardian newspapers say Dominic Cummings travelled to Durham from London with his family in March as he recovered from coronavirus.
People travelling to the UK will have to self-isolate for 2 weeks or face a fine of £1,000. The Home Secretary says the quarantine will apply to anyone who arrives into the country from June the 8th.
5 people will appear in court later, charged with the murder of a law student in Blackburn. 19-year-old Aya Hashem was shot as she walked to a supermarket near her home on Sunday.
Researchers say the drug which Donald Trump is taking to prevent coronavirus actually increases the risk of death amongst COVID-19 patients. A major study found those given hydroxychloroquine had a bigger chance of dying and having heart rhythm problems. Now, a few weeks ago, we brought you the story of Nicola Phillips, a student nurse and a mother of 2 fighting against coronavirus on the front line. Since talking to us, Nicola has been undertaking a placement at Scotland's Forth Valley Royal Hospital, and we want to know how she's managing to juggle shifts, university work and the demands of parenthood during this incredibly difficult and worrying time. Well, she's just finished a night shift. You need a medal for that. We're doing that and then agreeing to talk to us again this morning, Nicola. Good to see you. Look, you were very worried going into all of this, we know. How has it been so far?
It's been really good. It was an emotional roller coaster, obviously, at first. But I'm 4 weeks in now, and the team that I'm with are absolutely brilliant. I've been with them most of the year on placements, so that's relieved a lot of anxiety. And obviously, being in there, it's been really good. I feel quite relaxed now and know what I'm doing, and but like I say, it's an emotional roller coaster, so it differs every day.
I mean, and obviously you can't go into details about specific patients, but what sort of condition are people in that you're having to deal with?
It's a mixture. Where I am in the acute assessment unit, people come into us a lot of the time first. They come from either the GPs or they'll come straight from the ambulance from home. So we acutely assess people. So we get a whole load, lots of varieties of different cases coming in. At first, when I first came on placement, I was slightly worried at the fact that it used to be a lot busier. So I did worry about maybe people sitting at home who, maybe needed to come into hospital but didn't want to. I think personally I've seen a lot more mental health cases, and obviously we get COVID into our unit as we're a red zone and a yellow zone.
I mean, obviously, you've got your 2 girls. I know there's quite a few years between them, so no doubt they're handling things very differently in their own way. But on top of all the pressures you're facing at work, you've got to be thinking about how they're dealing with it and their mental health as well, haven't you?
Yeah. My oldest daughter's taking it a lot better than my youngest daughter. So, I spend a lot of time just trying to explain to her and keep her up to date with everything. And it's quite difficult, I think, for her when I come home from work and she can't really come near me, and and she's not at school, and I'm balancing. I've got 2 S's due at the moment, and I've got an exam next week, and I'm still doing lectures, and I'm doing Emily's schooling for her when I can. So it's quite a balance. So there's a lot of guilt because I can't give her that 100% at the moment. Especially as I'm on a lot of night shifts. So yeah, it's a balance, but we're getting there. We'll get through it. And we're just, we're quite a tight knit little family. So we're just doing everything we can. And obviously, my oldest daughter's always childminding for me, for my youngest. So yeah, we're just getting through it together.
Do you know what, Nicola? I bet there are thousands of people watching this at home who just thought exactly what I did when